Most men over 40 don't realize there's something happening inside their body right now. Something silent, something gradual, and something that may be responsible for the way they've been feeling lately. Not just physically, but mentally, emotionally, in ways that are hard to even explain to someone else. If you've noticed that your energy isn't what it used to be, if you've noticed that certain moments in your life don't feel as confident or as reliable as they once did, if you've woken up and thought, "What is happening to me?" then this video was made for you. Because what we're going to talk about today isn't widely discussed. Most doctors don't bring it up, most men don't ask about it. But it may be one of the most important things you can understand about your health after 40. And one simple habit may influence this more than most men realize. Let's start with something real. Picture a man in his late 40s. He's in decent shape, he takes care of himself. He's not living on fast food, he exercises a few times a week. By most standards, he looks fine, he looks healthy. And yet, something is off. He can feel it. There's a kind of hesitation that wasn't there before, a pressure he can't quite name, a silence in moments that used to feel natural and confident. Maybe he's in a relationship and his partner hasn't said anything. But he notices. He notices the small changes in her expression. He notices the way he avoids certain conversations. He notices that he started to feel like something is being lost. Not dramatically, not all at once, but slowly, piece by piece, day by day. That feeling, that quiet erosion of confidence is more common than most men admit. And here's what most men never realize. It's not about getting old. It's not about willpower. It's not about mindset. It's about something physical, something happening at a level most men have never even heard about. Here's what researchers have been observing over the past 2 decades. Inside your blood vessels, in the lining of those vessels, there is something called the endothelium. Most people have never heard that word, but it may be one of the most important structures in the male body after 40. The endothelium is a thin layer of cells that lines the inside of your blood vessels. Think of it as the inner wall of a pipe. And what those cells do when they're healthy is produce a molecule called nitric oxide. You may have heard that term before. Nitric oxide is a naturally occurring compound, and what it does is remarkable. It tells the blood vessels to relax, to open, to allow blood to move freely through them. When nitric oxide is being produced properly, blood flows, circulation is strong, tissues receive oxygen, energy is high, and performance, in every sense of the word, remains at its best. But here's where things start to get interesting. After 40, and this is something researchers have been documenting consistently, nitric oxide production begins to decline. Not dramatically at first, not in a way you can see, but gradually, year by year. The vessels become slightly less responsive, the signal to open and relax becomes weaker, and blood flow throughout the entire body begins to slow down. Now here's where this becomes really interesting, because most men assume that what they're experiencing is simply aging. And in one sense, yes, biological changes happen as we get older. That's true. But what researchers are now suggesting is that it's not just age that drives this decline. It's also lifestyle. It's what we do and what we stop doing that accelerates or slows the decline of nitric oxide production. And there are specific habits, specific everyday behaviors, that may be actively reducing your body's ability to produce this molecule. Things that seem harmless, things that most men do without a second thought. But that over months, sometimes years, may be quietly affecting the very system that controls blood flow, energy, and male performance. In a moment, you'll see exactly what those habits are. But first, let's understand why this matters so much. Your circulatory system is not just about your heart. Most men think of blood flow as something that's only relevant when something goes wrong, a heart attack, a stroke, a major event. But the truth is that circulation affects everything. It affects how your muscles feel after exercise. It affects how quickly your mind clears in the morning. It affects your mood, your stamina, your confidence, and it especially affects performance. Because the kind of physical response that men depend on for intimacy, that ability to feel engaged, present, and capable, is almost entirely dependent on healthy blood flow. When the vessels are open, when nitric oxide is doing its job, the body responds naturally, fully, reliably. But when circulation is compromised, even partially, that response becomes unpredictable, incomplete, and that's where the anxiety begins. What many experts are now observing is a direct connection between declining nitric oxide levels and the kind of performance issues that men in their 40s and 50s increasingly report. Not as a dramatic failure, but as a gradual unreliability, a hesitation, a sense that something isn't quite working the way it should. Over months, sometimes years. That gradual change starts to shape a man's identity. He starts to avoid situations where he might feel uncertain. He becomes more reserved, more guarded. His partner may not understand why. He may not fully understand why either. But the connection between what's happening in his body and what's happening in his life becomes undeniable. And remember what we said about the endothelium, that thin inner lining of the blood vessels. That is the structure that is slowly losing its ability to respond. And the habits that most men don't even question, we're going to talk about those now, may be accelerating that process. But this is the part most men never hear about. One of the most well-documented contributors to reduced nitric oxide production is something called oxidative stress. Now that may sound like a clinical term, and it is, but the concept is simple. Oxidative stress happens when there are too many free radicals in the body. Think of them as unstable molecules that damage cells, including the cells in the endothelium. And what causes oxidative stress? Poor sleep, processed foods high in refined sugars, chronic low-level stress, the kind that doesn't feel dramatic but never fully goes away, sedentary periods throughout the day, and something that surprises most men, mouthwash. Specifically, antiseptic mouthwash used twice a day. Here's why that last one matters. There are bacteria in your mouth, beneficial bacteria, that play a role in converting dietary nitrates into nitric oxide. When you use strong antiseptic mouthwash regularly, you may be disrupting that bacterial environment. And what many researchers are now observing is that this simple, daily habit, one that billions of men follow because they believe it's healthy, may actually be interfering with the body's ability to produce nitric oxide. This doesn't mean oral hygiene isn't important. It absolutely is, but the type of mouthwash and how it's used may matter more than most men have been told. And this changes everything. Because once you understand the system, once you see the connection between the inner lining of your blood vessels, nitric oxide, and the habits that support or undermine production, you start to look at health in a completely different way. It's not about one dramatic intervention. It's not about an extreme diet or a new medication. It's about understanding what the body actually needs and what has been quietly getting in the way. Let's talk about a few more habits, because there are several that researchers have specifically linked to declining nitric oxide and reduced vascular health in men over 40. The first is prolonged sitting. Most men over 40 have careers, routines, habits that involve long stretches of sitting. And what extended periods of inactivity due to the endothelium, to that critical inner lining, is gradual but significant. The sheer stress that blood flow creates against the vessel walls is actually a trigger for nitric oxide production. When you sit for hours at a time, that flow decreases, that mechanical signal weakens, and the endothelium produces less of the molecule your body needs. The second habit is consuming a diet high in processed fats and low in the amino acids your body needs to produce nitric oxide. Because nitric oxide isn't produced from nothing, it's synthesized, built, from specific compounds that come from food, primarily from amino acids like L-arginine and L-citrulline. When your diet doesn't consistently provide these compounds in adequate amounts, production suffers. Most men over 40 don't eat the kinds of foods that are rich in these amino acids with enough consistency, and the body's ability to convert dietary precursors into nitric oxide also becomes less efficient with age. This is what researchers suggest is a double challenge: reduced production capacity combined with reduced dietary support. The third habit, and this one is more subtle, is chronic, shallow breathing. The kind that most people default to during stress, during screen time, during long days of mental work. Deep, diaphragmatic breathing has been shown in multiple studies to support vascular function and nitric oxide release. But most men living modern lives breathe in short, shallow patterns throughout much of the day. And over time, that pattern contributes to a kind of vascular tension that compounds everything else. Now, here's something important, because if you've been listening to all of this and you're starting to feel concerned, that's actually a healthy response. Not anxious, not panicked, but aware. Because awareness is the first step in any real change. And what researchers have found consistently is that this system is not fixed. The endothelium has a capacity to recover. Nitric oxide production can be supported, circulation can improve, and men who make specific, targeted changes to how they eat, how they move, and how they support their vascular system report meaningful differences in how they feel, in their energy, in their confidence, in their performance. This is where the science becomes hopeful. Let's talk about what actually supports nitric oxide production. And let's start with the most studied compounds. L-citrulline is an amino acid found naturally in certain foods, watermelon being one of the most concentrated sources. What makes L-citrulline particularly interesting is that the body converts it into L-arginine more efficiently than consuming L-arginine directly. And L-arginine is the direct precursor to nitric oxide. So by supplying the body with L-citrulline, you're essentially giving it the raw material it needs to produce more of this critical molecule. Researchers have observed that consistent support with L-citrulline can contribute to healthier vascular function, improved blood vessel flexibility, better blood pressure regulation, and enhanced circulation in tissues throughout the body, including the tissues most relevant to male performance. L-arginine itself is also well studied. It's found in foods like red meat, chicken, fish, nuts, and seeds. But what many nutritional researchers point out is that dietary sources alone, especially in men over 40 whose conversion efficiency has declined, may not provide the consistent supply that the body needs for optimal nitric oxide synthesis. And remember the system we mentioned earlier, that inner lining of the blood vessels, the endothelium. This is where L-arginine is used. This is where nitric oxide is made. And this is where the impact of these compounds becomes most meaningful. There's another compound that's been studied extensively in the context of male vitality, Panax ginseng, sometimes called Korean ginseng or red ginseng, has been the subject of numerous clinical observations. What researchers have noted is that certain active components in Panax ginseng, called ginsenosides, appear to support endothelial function. They may contribute to the release of nitric oxide in the blood vessel walls, and they've been observed to support energy, stamina, and overall vitality in men. This isn't a new discovery. Panax ginseng has been used in traditional health practices for centuries, but what modern research has done is begin to identify the specific mechanisms behind those traditional observations. And the connection to vascular health and male performance is one of the most consistent findings in that literature. But here's the part most men overlook. It's not just about what compounds are available, it's about consistency. The body doesn't change overnight. The endothelium doesn't recover in a week. The kind of improvement that men report in energy, in circulation, in confidence tends to emerge over weeks, sometimes months. Because what we're talking about isn't a quick chemical fix. We're talking about supporting a biological system that has been under pressure for years. That takes patience, and it takes consistency. This is why food alone is often not enough. Not because food isn't important, it absolutely is, but because the modern lifestyle, the long hours, the processed foods, the chronic stress, the disrupted sleep, creates a consistent drain on the system, and a consistent drain requires consistent support. What many men have found is that supplementing their diet with targeted compounds, particularly L-citrulline, L-arginine, and Panax ginseng, in conjunction with lifestyle adjustments, gives the body what it needs to begin functioning the way it was designed to. And this changes the conversation entirely. Because instead of waiting for something to go wrong, instead of feeling like a passive observer of your own decline, you become someone who understands the system, someone who knows what the body needs, and someone who is actively choosing to support it. That feeling, that sense of agency, is itself part of the recovery. Because so much of what men over 40 experience isn't just physical. It's the loss of confidence that comes from feeling out of control, the the sense that the body is doing something you didn't agree to, the quiet grief of not feeling like yourself. But here's what the research keeps showing. Men who take an active role in their vascular health, who understand nitric oxide, who support their circulation, who adjust their habits, don't just feel physically better. They feel mentally better, more confident, more present, more like the version of themselves they want to be. Let's bring this back to the beginning. To that man we described, the one who looks fine on the outside, who takes reasonable care of himself, but who has been quietly losing confidence, quietly avoiding certain moments, quietly wondering what happened. What happened, in most cases, isn't a mystery. It's a biological process that most men have never been taught about. It's the slow decline of nitric oxide production, the gradual stiffening of blood vessels, the compounding effect of modern habits on an ancient biological system. And the good news, and this is genuinely good news, is that the body responds. When you remove the habits that undermine circulation, when you add the nutrients that support nitric oxide production, when you sleep more consistently, move more regularly, and breathe more deeply, the system responds, not overnight, but progressively, in ways that are real and meaningful. Now, here's where this becomes practical. Because understanding the biology is one thing, but most men, understandably, want to know what to actually do with this information. The foundational habits are clear. Reduce prolonged sitting. Take movement breaks throughout the day. Even a 10-minute walk has been shown to stimulate nitric oxide release through that mechanical shear stress we talked about earlier. Prioritize deep breathing, not as a meditation practice necessarily, but simply as a conscious correction to the shallow breathing patterns that most men default to. This alone can support vascular tone in ways that are measurable. Adjust your diet toward foods that contain nitric oxide precursors. Beets, leafy greens, watermelon, and protein sources rich in L-arginine are all foods that have been studied in this context. And if you use antiseptic mouthwash twice daily, consider whether a gentler option might be appropriate for you. Sleep is foundational, and yet it's the thing most men sacrifice first. What happens during deep sleep, particularly slow-wave sleep, is critical for vascular recovery. Growth hormone is released. Inflammation decreases. The endothelium repairs itself. When you consistently cut sleep short, below 7 hours, you're interrupting a repair process that the vascular system depends on. Stress management isn't just psychological, it's vascular. Cortisol, the primary stress hormone, is a direct antagonist to nitric oxide. High cortisol levels suppress production. This is why chronic stress isn't just mentally exhausting, it's physically eroding the very system that supports male performance and vitality. These aren't complicated insights, but they are insights that most men have never been given together as a coherent picture of how the body actually works. And this is where things start to get interesting for men who want to take it further. Because beyond lifestyle adjustments, beyond diet and sleep and movement, there is a growing body of research on targeted nutritional support for vascular health in men over 40. L-citrulline and L-arginine, as we discussed, provide the direct building blocks for nitric oxide synthesis. Panax ginseng supports endothelial function, but there are other compounds that researchers have observed playing supportive roles in this system. Pine bark extract, sometimes standardized as pycnogenol, has been studied for its effects on endothelial function and nitric oxide production. Beetroot extract is another compound that has received significant research attention in the context of vascular health, exercise performance, and circulation. What's interesting about many of these compounds is how they work together. The body's production of nitric oxide isn't a single-step process. It involves multiple pathways, and supporting those pathways with a range of complementary nutrients rather than relying on a single compound is what many researchers now suggest as the more effective approach for men who want meaningful, lasting support. For men who want to explore a natural way to support this process, there's a resource available in the description below. It's not a sales pitch. It's simply information about a formulation that was developed specifically with vascular health and male vitality in mind. Men who have used it consistently report feeling more energy, more confidence, more reliable in the moments that matter. Take a look when you're ready. There's no pressure. What matters most is that you now understand the system. And that understanding, by itself, puts you ahead of the vast majority of men your age. Let's close with this. You are not in decline. You are in transition. And there is a difference. Decline implies a direction that can't be changed. Transition implies movement from one state to another. And what the science consistently shows is that the male body at 40, at 50, at 60 has a remarkable capacity for recovery when it is given the right support. The men who feel their best in their 50s and 60s are not men who simply got lucky with genetics. They are men who understood what their body needed. They are men who paid attention to the signals, the hesitation, the fatigue, the quiet loss of confidence, and chose to respond with knowledge rather than resignation. That's who you are. That's why you're watching this. Because something in you hasn't accepted the idea that this is just how it goes. And that instinct, that refusal to simply accept decline, is exactly right. The blood flow that supports your energy, your strength, your confidence, it can be supported. The nitric oxide system that drives circulation throughout your entire body, it can be nourished. The version of yourself that you remember, that felt strong, confident, capable, isn't gone. It's waiting for the right support. And now you know what that support looks like. You know about the endothelium. You know about nitric oxide. You know about the habits that undermine it and the nutrients that support it. You have a picture of your own biology that most men never receive. Use it. Start with one change. Just one. Whether it's how you breathe, whether it's what you eat, whether it's how long you sit without moving. One change, done consistently, creates momentum. And momentum creates transformation. If you found this helpful and this video gave you a new perspective on your health, subscribe for daily content on men's vitality after 40. Drop a comment below. What's the one change you're going to make first? And if you know a man who needs to hear this, share this video with him.